Hello everyone, my name is Fox. This video we're going to be reviewing the latest Anbernic device, their RG40XX V. This is their vertical handheld format for the tried and true H700 chipset that has been in all of the 40XDX types of devices that have come out for Anbernic. If you're not familiar, Anbernic will iterate through a lot of designs while using the same chipset. This allows them to cater to a wider audience that have a specific layout that they prefer while being able to reuse the same parts they've used previously while keeping all of those iterative improvements that they've made to the software and firmware to kind of just catch up to where they are on this latest one. The biggest iterative improvement that Anbernic has made is this D-pad. This D-pad is the best Anbernic D-pad that they have made in the traditional type of Nintendo Plus style of design. It is a membrane-based D-pad, so for those people that prefer membrane-based, this is the very best that Anbernic has made. We'll get more into the D-pad part of this review a little bit later on. Very quickly, I did want to go over the specs, even though they're going to be familiar for a lot of you. The biggest standout will be the screen itself, which is a 4-inch IPS screen with a resolution of 640 by 480, giving the aspect ratio of 4:3. The types of games that look really stellar on this display are a lot of arcade emulated games. And that's not to say that arcade is the only types of games that look good on this display. Dreamcast fills out the panel quite nicely, especially with like Crazy Taxi 2 with its very stylized, cartoonish color palette. Or even Game Boy games, which Anbernic has done a lot of work so that when you load up a Game Boy or even a Game Boy Color game, so that it will present itself as a Game Boy. We can see a little power button there that is just completely done by the LCD itself, and then a shader applied over the game itself so that it can give it the characteristic green type of coloring to a Game Boy game as opposed to a monochromatic type of display, which it would be naturally. This also works for Game Boy Color games as well. Now, Anbernic tries to do this for a lot of other systems as well, but it doesn't work out for every system, and you'll have some kind of weird layout where even for like Genesis, you're gonna have this thin little bar that's on the bottom, which kind of seems out of place, but I would have rathered in those particular instances that it was just black and trying to instead of filling in something there, but that's just my preference. And then the thing that's driving this obviously is the H700 chipset, which is in all of the 40XDX types of devices from Anbernic, which is itself a quad-core ARM Cortex-A53 series of CPUs. It does feature a dual-core G31MP2 GPU, and 1 GB of LPDDR4 RAM. Storage-wise, you have 2 microSD card slots that'll be available on this particular unit. They do include a 64 GB microSD card on here. Another thing that they've been adding by default, which is really nice, is that they've been including Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and it's very capable Wi-Fi, both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz are going to be on here, and speeds are very good, so you'll be able to have support for retro achievements as well as NetPlay and other features like that, so it's a lot more full-featured overall. The battery included on here is 3200 milliamp hour. Anbernic themselves say that it's going to last 6 hours, and in my testing, that seems to be the case. Generally speaking, when we push it to the limit, we have one instance here where I'm running an N64 game and I'm running fast forward, so I'm going to be pushing that CPU as hard as it possibly can. And then another is a more traditional type of test that I do, which is Crash Bandicoot 3. This will stress the system generally, and when we take a look at these two different games running, both of these are at near maximum brightness, and what we get is for the N64 version where we're pushing it as hard as we can, we're getting basically 5 hours of battery life. And for the PlayStation emulation for Crash Bandicoot, we're getting a little bit under 6 hours. So generally speaking, around 6 hours of gameplay is what you're going to get out of this. This is a bit lower than the other RG40XDX devices, likely due to the display here is going to be sapping a lot of the power as opposed to the other types of devices. So that's something interesting that you may want to think about when thinking about this particular device, is that it does seem to have slightly less battery life than the other 40XDX devices. Now that we got the specs out of the way, let's start talking about this D-pad, because this D-pad is truly special. Insofar as that Anbernic has often done this traditional D-pad style design, which is a very Nintendo style design with membrane-based interface underneath it, and they've often been just okay. They're better than okay. I often gave them a B+ ranking. This is the first Anbernic traditional style membrane-based D-pad that I am willing to say this is an A+ D-pad. Whatever incremental improvement that Anbernic has been doing when making hundreds of these different types of handhelds, this is the first time that I've been able to actually get every particular action that I wanted out of playing Street Fighter. In this very video, it is completely unedited. Everything you're seeing here is me exactly doing exactly what I wanted every instance. It's absolutely incredible. In fact, I can pull off super moves on my first try, and I do it twice in this video. I can also do parries, which is like something that I've never felt comfortable enough inside of these types of handhelds before. And it's probably the first handheld that Anbernic has ever made, the first retro handheld that I felt that I would actually consider playing fighting games on. That's how good this D-pad is. It's so alarming how well they have done, and it may just seem like these small, minor incremental improvements that Anbernic has made here. Just having the confidence that it's going to do exactly what you want it to do is something that is incredibly important, especially for fighting games. Now, that's just for fighting games. When we really talk about D-pads, there's a lot to them. In terms of, like, when you're pressing on them, there is a fatigue that can happen. This is usually what people refer to as a mushy D-pad. The bottom line here is that there's very little fatigue that you're going to have from this D-pad because of the tactility of the D-pad itself. Pressing in any given direction is instantly felt tactility-wise, like you can feel the interface, the membrane interface depress, as well as audibly hear it. And that works just the same for the face buttons as well. So overall, the inputs that are on here, the traditional style inputs, are top tier for this particular handheld, and is one of the reasons why I would particularly recommend it. Counter to this is this singular analog stick. Now, the analog stick isn't terrible. I also don't really have a problem with where it's placed specifically on this device itself. It's really just that it has really high sensitivity. It's almost digital in nature. Now, even in like PlayStation, you can make it a DualShock, and you can say it's using an analog stick, but even just pressing a little bit, there's only 2 or 3 steps that I can really feel. Even pressing a little bit, the dead zone on this is super wide. So the analog stick in terms of input fidelity isn't the best, but it does work, especially if you wanted to play things like the Nintendo DS. In Nintendo DS, you can use the analog stick that will operate as a virtual stylus that'll be able to be used. So you'll depress on L3 itself to actuate pressing on the stylus. So it is a useful feature overall, but then in games like Quake, where it anticipates having dual analog sticks, you're only going to be able to use the left analog stick to kind of strafe around and move, and then use the D-pad. So you're kind of shuffling between those. That's not really a great experience for that particular perspective. So I almost feel like they should have just put 2 analog sticks on here. Just having a single analog stick is kind of weird, and the analog sticks themselves are just okay. But I'm glad that it's there, given that the form factor and it has space for it. So can I recommend Anbernic's RG40XX V? It's a bit hard for me to recommend, only because there's been so many iterations that Anbernic has made of this particular series of chipsets, where you're not going to get any performance improvements because all of the performance is going to be pretty much the same. Now, my particular favorite form factor is the RG35XDX SP, just because I like clamshells. It's something that's far more pocketable and compact, and the types of inputs are all I care about from the retro side of things. So I really prefer the RG35XDX SP. This is very nice if you like a vertical style form factor and something that's a little bit more traditional Game Boy style, especially for playing Game Boy games. The singular analog stick is great for Nintendo DS, but not for anything else really. And if you wanted analog sticks, you're probably better off with the RG40XDX-H, which has 2 analog sticks, and it's a bit more pocketable than this is. So it's a bit weird where I would actually place this in the pantheon of Anbernic RG40 or XDX style devices, H700 series devices. Really, it just comes down to, this is a fantastic D-pad. It is great for fighting games. It has a very nice large screen that looks great for those types of games, but that's also similar for the other types of Anbernic devices as well. So really, it's going to come down to you to answer the question, do you have an XDX or an H700 series Anbernic device already? If you don't, I would consider this if you wanted something that had a very good traditional style and membrane-based D-pad, because without a doubt, this is the best that Anbernic has made in this particular series. So that's the biggest thing that I could say for this particular device. I'd like to give a big shout out to my YouTube channel members as well as my Patreon members. Your support really does mean the world to me, guys. I hope this video was informative. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.